Visitors, we always want to invite those who are visiting back at every chance you get, and also to let you know how pleased and honored we are to have you with us. It's been a long time since we have done a question and answer session, so we're going to look at some questions and answers tonight. I told somebody, I said I've got about 50 questions in the queue, but don't worry, we'll knock out about 35 of those tonight. We'll get to these as we can. Just between a mission trip and some other things that have popped up, we just haven't been able to get to questions and answers as regularly as I would like. Usually I like to do that once a month. I have doubled up in a month before. I don't know that we'll get to do that this month either. Between having Book of the Month on the fourth Sunday of the month and looking at Science in the Bible on the first Sunday, that only leaves us two in between. It might be a possibility at some point to double up and catch up if we need to, but hopefully we can make up some ground as we go along the next few months or so. I love having questions in the queue though, because I've said it before. I love Q&A because this is driven by questions that you have about the Bible. Sometimes these come from our adults, sometimes these come from our young folks. Sometimes they come from those in between, but these are questions that you have about the Bible, and it's something that I know is interesting to the folks, because I know if one person has wondered that, there's a pretty good chance someone else has as well. So that being said, let's just jump right in. First question comes from Matthew 27. If you'll turn in your Bible there to Matthew chapter 27, this is at the crucifixion of Jesus. And by the way, if you notice that your question hasn't come up in a while, that's why, because we've had several come in, and sometimes it gets behind. And that's another reason why sometimes we'll try to do a make-up Q&A if I need to, because I don't want questions to sit too long. This is one that I've had for a little while, and one reason why I didn't do this one, it's been a little bit farther down in the queue, but also just wanted to do some more research on it and make sure I could give the best answer that's possible. Sometimes, sometimes we answer these questions and the answer is, I don't know. And that's partially the answer with this one as well. Let me go ahead and give you the question. The question is pertaining to Matthew 27, 52 and 53. The question asks, how much time lapsed between verses 50 and 51 and verses 52 and 53? And then, of course, what happened to these people who rose from the grave? Now, looking at those verses, we'll just begin at verse 50. Jesus, when he cried again with a loud voice, yielded up the ghost. We've pointed out before, no one could take his life from him. In fact, he specifically says this in John 10, that no one could take his life from him. He lays it down. He says, I have the power to take it up. I have the power to lay it down. Jesus was, in a sense, he was killed by the Jews, by the Romans. But in another sense, no one killed Jesus. He gave his life. Had he not been willing to do so, no one could take it from him, obviously. That's the difference between Jesus. Behold, the veil of the temple was rent in twain from the top to the bottom. Significant there, because the veil was rent not from the bottom to the top, indicating a man starting that tear and tearing upward. God is rending the veil of the temple. There's no more division between the Jews and the Gentiles. It opens the way into the most holy place. Refuge being a shadow of the church. The tabernacle, it was a shadow of the church as well. The temple being a shadow of the church. And the most holy place being a shadow of heaven itself. So the way into heaven is open. So the veil of the temple was rent in twain from the top to the bottom. The earth did quake, and the rocks rent, or the rocks were rent, broken apart, in other words. And the graves were opened, and many bodies of the saints which slept arose and came out of the graves after his resurrection and went into the holy city and appeared unto many. So the graves were opened. The bodies of the saints which slept. Slept is many times a metaphor that is used for death. So dead saints, holy ones. In the New Testament, saints simply refers to a Christian. It's not some kind of a special person that's had a vote of a council or anything such as that. Saint simply means a child of God, a Christian. It literally translates to Holy One. So here he's talking about the bodies of holy ones. Now, it wouldn't be Christians because the church has not begun at this point. But these were people who were righteous souls. They were folks who died faithful to God. So they came out of the graves after his resurrection and went into the holy city, and they appeared unto many folks. Now the question, getting to the question. As far as the timeline, here's the basic timeline. The graves were opened at his death. Every indication there is there's no kind of a time lapse. The rocks were rent, graves were opened. Many of the bodies of the saints which slept arose and came out of the graves after his resurrection. So the graves were opened at his death. A lot of times they would bury their loved ones in, not literally inside of a rock, but in fact it even says Joseph of Arimathea, in whose tomb Jesus was laid, it was hewn out of a rock. And so if rocks begin to split open, that leaves the graves open, and then after the resurrection of Jesus, some of these saints, these holy ones, rose from the dead and they went into the city. Who were they? This is the part where we can all just do like this because we just don't know. There is absolutely no idea who these were. I think we can make some speculation and it has some credence, but remember, at the end of the day, this is speculation because the Bible doesn't tell us. Albert Barnes makes some comments on this, and I think there might be something to this. He says they might very well be friends or disciples of Jesus who were raised up as an attestation, to attest to the fact that he, on whom they believe, Jesus, is in fact the Christ. That's a possibility. Jameson Fawcett Brown commentary makes this, I'm quoting partially from them. They basically said perhaps these risen saints or holy ones might be trophies of his victory over the grave. Again, a possibility. But ultimately, we just don't know. The second part of the question, what became of them or what happened to them, is another, I'm sorry to tell you, it's another just, I don't know. There's nothing I can tell you. In fact, I give you a quote here from Albert Barnes' commentary on the New Testament. What became of them after they had entered into the city, whether they again died or ascended to heaven, is not revealed, and conjecture is vain. I think that's a very wise statement there. Of course, these commentaries are written by men. They're uninspired, but that certainly is a wise statement. When the Bible hasn't revealed, we can guess, and there's nothing wrong with that. We can even use some an educated guess, as we sometimes use that terminology. But understand, when all is said and done, the Bible doesn't reveal this, so we just don't know. I think I like what Brother J.W. McGarvey has to say in his fourfold gospel. By the way, you may hear me from time to time mention something by McGarvey. I think I've pointed this out before. Everything ever written by J.W. McGarvey is out of copyright. There's no, once something reaches, I think it's 100 years old. Is that right, Bob? I think you and I have had this discussion. Or it might be after 1901, previous to 1901, I think is the way it was. But anyway, it's after a certain amount of time or past a certain date, there is no more copyright. So everything J.W. McGarvey has ever written is available on the internet in PDF form. You can get that, you can download it, you can read it online, you can download it and print it out, whatever you want to do, but it's available. And anything he's written is worth reading. It is absolutely worth your time. But he makes the statement that he thinks that this was some kind of a symbolic gesture from God the Father, showing the resurrection of Jesus as the resurrection of the race. Again, I think there might be something to that. Bottom line, why did this happen? We don't know exactly why. The only thing I think we can say with any kind of confidence and certainty is that Jesus, he gives up his spirit. He commends, Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. He dies, gives up his life. There's an earthquake. This earthquake tears some of the rocks rocks split, opening graves. And then after the resurrection of Christ, some of those graves were emptied. Some of the people who were in those graves, holy ones, they came out. They went into the city. They appeared unto many. They were somebody that people would have recognized because they go into the city and the indication seems to be there that people recognize them. But as far as what happened to them after that, no one can say with any kind of real certainty. So I know there's a lot of I don't knows in that, but sometimes there are things that we just we do the best we can, and the Bible doesn't tell us 100%. But Jesus died, the earthquake, rocks were split, graves opened, and then 3 days later, some of them arose and went into the city. Exactly why this happened or what happened to those people after that, we just don't know for sure. But a very, very interesting question. And that was one that, like I said, I sat on that for a little while because I wanted to do some thorough research and make sure I told you the right thing, whether it was I don't know or some other answer. So good question there. Number 2, this is pertaining to children and parents. I've had this one for a little bit as well, not quite as long, but just knowing that we would study this in our Hebrew history class, and so having it today, it just so happened that this was today. I wanted to study it I wanted to answer the question around that time, but I also wanted to, I didn't rather know that it would end up being on the exact same day. So a lot of what I'm going to say with this question is actually, it's listed as 2 questions, but it was all submitted as one. I just couldn't fit it all on one slide. But I'm going to refer you to, on a lot of this, some of you were in our auditorium class this morning, where we're studying Hebrew history here in the adult auditorium class. We had a lot of comments and discussion about this this morning with Eli and his sons. We talked about it a little bit last week even. So I'll refer you to that if you happen not to be in that class and you want some more detail or some more discussion on this. The YouTube archive is there, the Facebook archive as well. But I'll give you kind of the short answer here. But I forgot to delete the second half of this, but it'll carry over to the other slide. But anyways, we're going to answer the first part of this. At what point or age does obeying your parents stop being applicable? What about parents who are not Christians? And what about honoring them? Is there an age limit for that, for honoring parents? Is that honoring parents? Is that applicable to non-Christian parents? And, of course, finally, what does it mean to honor? There's a lot going on in this question. There are a lot of questions within this overall question, but we're going to answer the first part as pertaining to obeying parents. And again, there's a lot more about this in that Sunday morning class from this morning. Ephesians 6:4, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. There's a qualifying statement to children, obey your parents, in the Lord. Now, what that means is you honor and obey your parents as long as it doesn't go against God. It doesn't mean only if they're Christians, because there is an obligation to obey parents even if they're not Christians, unless they tell you to do something that goes against God. If mom and dad tell you to do something that goes, and sometimes that happens, they'll tell children sometimes to do something that goes against God. I've even known of a few cases where some teenagers that were trying to do what was right were fighting battles with non-Christian parents, because non-Christian parents would say, oh, you're not going to Bible study tonight on a Wednesday. Your homework's not done. And that teenager would say, no, listen, I will get my homework done, Mom. I give you my word. I'm going to take care of that. I'm going to do the right thing, but I need to be there. This is my responsibility. And the parents not being Christians, they didn't understand that. And so it caused some friction. But the child even come to the point of saying, look, I don't want to disobey you here, but I have an obligation to do what's right, even if it goes against what you say, because what you're telling me is to skip church, and that's not right. So there is the qualification, obey your parents in. When does that cease being applicable? Again, we talked a lot about this in class this morning. There is no magic age where you can say this doesn't apply. You can't say, well, when a child turns 18. You know, our country says when you turn 18, you're old enough, you can go to war. You could be drafted. You could sign up for the military. To buy alcohol. And of course, nobody has any business buying that anyways, but I'm just pointing out there are these different set of fixed ages for different things. There's not an age that we can go to in Scripture. We've talked about this before with the age of accountability. There's no magic number. You can say, well, when a child turns this many years old, he or she is just, boom, they're accountable, and they need to obey the gospel, and if they don't at that exact instant, they're going to be lost. Same thing here. You can't say, well, when a child turns 18, no longer accountable to mom and dad. And in fact, I've told you before, there were many a times, if I had a nickel for every time I heard, boy, as long as you sleep under my roof, put your feet under my table, you're going to play by my rules. And, you know, the older I get, the more I understand and appreciate that. But that was said to me when I was 19, 20 years old sometimes, because I moved away for a time, preaching school, ended up coming back home for a little bit, and sometimes children live in their parents' houses for a time. Well, if you're in mom or dad's house, that could apply for a stranger for that matter. If you're living in somebody's house, you're subject to their rules. But there's no magic age. Common sense tells us, you know, at least in the sense of a husband and wife, when they become a family, and when a man and woman are married scripturally, they form a family. That's a family unit. You know, sometimes we talked about this morning, sometimes people say, when are you going to start a family? Well, when you are married, you start a family. So the husband's the head of the wife. Paul talks about this by inspiration in Ephesians 5. She's in submission to him, not her parents. Let a man leave father and mother and cleave to his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh. Genesis 2, verse 24. So Adam points out that marriage involves leaving father and mother, cleaving to your spouse. Obviously, if a wife is in submission to her husband, then there's an obligation there to him. Well, what if the parents now, you know, again, if everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing, no parent, no godly parent is going to try to talk son or daughter into doing something that goes against his or her spouse's wishes. But if they did, there's no obligation to obey that. Because at some point, common sense would tell us you've formed your own family. You're answerable for yourself. And in the case of a husband, you're answerable for the soul of your wife as well. And then later on, children, if there are any children. So, you know, I can't give you a magic number, but you know, some common sense would say when you form your own family, then your children will be subject to you. They need to obey you. You're the head of that household as a father. As a mother, you're over those children, but there's no obligation to obey parents, which gets us to the second part of that, and that's why I don't want to be misunderstood. I want to make sure we get to the second part here, because the second part deals with honoring parents. There's no age limit on honoring parents. Unlike obeying parents, that's not something that obviously can apply all the way throughout life, because you get older, you grow up, you've got your own family, you're guiding your own household, and so on and so forth. But what about honor? Sometimes people think when you say you don't have to obey your parents as you get into adulthood that you're saying you don't have to honor your parents. That's not what we're saying at all. What does it mean to honor? Let's talk about that first of all. Honor is from a Hebrew word. It looks like kabad or something like that, but I'm told it's pronounced kalbad. I've told you before, I don't know a whole lot about Hebrew, but that's what I'm told is the pronunciation, something like kalbad. It literally means to be heavy. Now, that can have a good sense or a bad sense depending on the context. In fact, sometimes you'll see it in the Old Testament used with both senses. It's literally the idea of a burden. It might be a burden of honor. It could be a burden in the sense of dishonor. For instance, very interestingly, this same word is used when the Bible says Pharaoh hardened his heart. In a very real sense, he dishonored God. We could in one sense translate that saying he hardened his heart. He dishonored God. There was this burden upon him from the Lord, but he was having none of it. And so he dishonored God. It's also, if you'll turn to 1 Samuel, I just want to notice a couple of verses in 1 Samuel. Again, I know we talked about this morning, but I just want to look at these two verses in this prophecy given to Eli. 1 Samuel 2, and God uses some pretty strong language speaking to Eli about the judgment that's going to come upon his household because he didn't restrain his sons. And again, this is not a one-time thing. We talked about this in class. This was something that clearly had been ongoing with Eli. And we also noticed this morning that Eli wasn't hesitant to lecture his sons. He would kind of say to them, now don't do this. You know what you're doing is not right. But he didn't take any action to restrain them, whether it be corporal punishment or something else. It ended with a good talk. And at some point, talk has to turn to action. in many areas of life, but especially when it comes to disciplining children. 1 Samuel 2:29, God is speaking through a prophet to Eli, and he says, "Wherefore kick ye at my sacrifice?" We talked about that last week, kind of the idea of snuffing at it, as the Bible says in Malachi, to regard it as a light thing. "Wherefore kick ye at my sacrifice and at mine offering, which I have commanded in my habitation, and honorest," there's your word in the Hebrew, "honorest Chalbad thy sons above me, to make yourselves fat with the chiefest of all the offerings of Israel my people. Wherefore the Lord God of Israel saith, I said indeed that thy house and the house of thy father should walk before me forever. But now the Lord saith, Be it far from me, for them that honor me I will honor, and they that despise me shall be lightly esteemed." It's the same Hebrew word used of Eli honoring his sons above God. To the Jews, this word meant respect, it meant submission, but it also carried the idea of care, concern, nurture. Having honor, having respect, having reverence for our parents does not have any kind of an age limit. There's going to come a time, if a child grows up and the natural process carries out, and there's the independence and intellectual ability and so on and so forth, where he or she is going to be on his or her own as far as obedience. Always responsible to God, of course. But there's never an age at which I can say, you know what, I don't owe my parents respect anymore. What about even if they're not Christians? The Bible is pretty clear that even if they're not Christians, I can still respect them. Now, again, I don't respect a view or a position or an action that goes against the Word of God. But I can respect them for who they are, my parents. You know what? I don't always agree with the leader of our country, the President of the United States of America. Don't always agree with the President, current or past. Don't always think that what he's done is in any way, shape, form, or fashion in alliance and in accord with biblical instruction. But I respect that office. And I think sometimes even as Christians, we need to be more aware of that and respect and the teaching of Romans 13 and other passages, that you respect that office for what it is. Fear the king, Paul says in other passages. It's the idea of respect, reverence for that position, even though the person filling that position may not be a godly person. Oftentimes is not a godly person. Same thing with parents. We can respect them for being parents, for the fact that they are our parents, without agreeing with everything that they say or do, and without even necessarily being under obligation to obey them. I want you to notice something in Matthew 15. Turn to Matthew 15 and notice some verses here. Jesus is going to issue a stinging rebuke to some of the religious leaders of his day because they were violating this very idea. He doesn't get on to them because they're not obeying their parents, but this is dealing with honor. He's going to give, again, a strong rebuke. Matthew 15, in the beginning of the chapter, they're scribes and Pharisees of Jerusalem, and they want to know, why do your disciples transgress the tradition of the elders? For they wash not their hands when they eat bread. And we've talked about this before. They didn't go through this big ceremony. But Jesus answered and said unto them, verse 3, Why do ye also transgress the commandment of God by your tradition? For God commanded, saying, Honor thy father and mother, and he that curseth father or mother, let him die the death. But ye say, Whosoever shall say to his father or his mother, It is a gift, by whatsoever thou mightest be profited by me, and honor not his father or his mother, he shall be free. Thus have you made the commandment of God of none effect by your tradition. He says, we're not violating any command of God by failure to follow your tradition of hand washing. There's nothing in the law of Moses that required them to go through that ceremonial hand washing. But you know what there was in the law of Moses a requirement to do? To honor father and mother, which meant respect. It meant submission. It meant reverence, but it also meant care. And so what they would do is give a one-time gift. We would say a donation to the church. And they would say, well, Mom, Dad, I'm really sorry. I wish I could take care of you. Maybe they're, in our day and age, it might be something the cost of maybe a nursing home or an assisted living facility or something like that, or maybe just helping them get by. I wish I could help you with that, but I made that donation to the church. And here are people that they're patting themselves on the back. Oh, you did a good thing. You donated to the Lord's work. They're patting themselves on the back for doing something good when what they really did was they completely went against the will of God. God said, you take care of your parents. You have an obligation to your family. And honoring your parents even means caring for them as they get to the point where it may be that they're not able to care for themselves. And you can't just blow them off and say, well, sorry, I gave it to the church. That's why I tell people sometimes money can be difficult to let go of for some folks. But some folks, they'll give the money because they don't want to give the time or the effort. And that's what these Jews were doing. They didn't want to spend any time or any effort on their family, so they would just give money, give a donation to the temple. And the rabbis and some of the religious leaders, eager to receive that money, would just say, oh, sure, yeah, you can go tell your parents. You've fulfilled your obligation. And Jesus said, you've made the commandment of God of none effect. But this all centers around them not honoring their parents. So a very good question there dealing with children and their parents. And again, this morning, our 9 o'clock Bible class hour here in the auditorium, last week as well, those are all available on our YouTube channel if you want to look at a little bit more in-depth discussion of some of these things. Next question. I have had several of these. Some of these go back to before our Science and the Bible series, but I'm going to go ahead and throw this in here anyways because several people, mostly our young folks, have asked this question. Some of them have submitted it 2 or 3 times. I think they maybe just gave up on Mr. Chad answering their question. I don't know, but I didn't forget you. 2 different questions at least here. Do we have a date of when the world began, and how many years ago was the earth made? Well, do we have a date of when the world began? No. I can't give you an answer to that because we just don't have anything specific that we can go by. Even looking at the Bible and the discrepancy between biblical dating, age of the earth, and the so-called scientific community, by and large, the evolutionary age of the earth, even looking at the biblical records, you can't affix an exact date and say, well, it began on Tuesday, the first day, you just can't do that. But how many years ago was the earth made? That's the other part of this question. Well, evolution says something like 4 billion years. I think the most common answer I got when I searched it's 4.5 billion. Evolutionists are all over the place on this. They can't agree. The only thing they seem to agree on is that there is no creator, that it evolved from nothing. Atheistic, inorganic evolution. That's about the only thing you can get them to agree on. They can't even agree on how old the earth is, how long this took to happen. But they say 4 billion years, or usually it's some billion, some number of billions of years. But that's just basically trying to accommodate this ridiculous, this impossible theory of evolution. And the evolutionists themselves, I think it was George Gaylord Simpson who made the statement that I've got quoted there, time is the hero of the plot. But listen, you may have seen a movie where the hero pulled off some pretty impossible feats, but, there's no hero out there that could accomplish what evolution claims that time has accomplished in that scenario. You don't get something from nothing, folks. And it never ceases to amaze me how sometimes atheists will mock those who believe in the Bible and those who believe in a creator, an all-powerful creator, and they'll say, oh, yeah, you believe in spirits? Wow, you must be really dumb. And I'm not trying to be rude, but let's just flip that around, folks, and say, seriously? When there's evidence all around us of a supreme being and a supreme creator, and you want to talk silly, you think that's foolish, but you believe that something came from nothing. It's never been observed to happen ever. It's been scientifically proven not to happen. It's been scientifically proven that matter is not eternal. It had to come from somewhere. But you just say one day something just popped into existence, and man, as time went on, it just turned into kind of this primordial soup, and as more time went on, life just sprang into that thing. Now you tell me what's more ridiculous. I know what's more ridiculous out of that. I tell people, I don't have the faith to be an evolutionist. I don't have the faith to be an atheist because it's so utterly ridiculous. The evidence points toward a creator and special creationism, as we've seen and will continue to see in our Science in the Bible series. But biblically, to answer the second part of that question, we can't be exact. We know the earth is something like 6,000 to 10,000 years old. There's some, looking at genealogies and things like that in the Bible, somewhere in that range. And sometimes it's a whole other sermon, a whole other study for another time when you talk about that, because there's different scholars looking at different things, but somewhere around 6,000 to 10,000. No younger than 6, it would seem. No older than 10,000 years, but not billions, not millions, thousands. And some of this is what we're covering in our Science in the Bible series, but I wanted to answer that question because I'd had it submitted 2 or 3 times, and I wanted to make sure that folks didn't think their question was just getting ignored. Going right with that, same reasoning here. This question had been asked a couple times. One person in particular, one of our young folks, wanted to know, what is the actual meaning of evolution? Well, I started to skip over this because we've talked about it so much in our Science in the Bible series, and this one was just submitted once. But here's what I want to point out. This seems like a pretty simple question, but it is very, very important, because I've seen this happen sometimes where somebody will really mock and make fun, because a creationist or a Christian will say something like, evolution is completely, utterly ridiculous and it's false. And somebody will say, well, that just shows how ignorant and dumb you are, because evolution has been proven. And sometimes the Christian is really taken aback by that, and they say, what? No. And sometimes you end up talking past each other. And here's what I mean by that. There are 2 different kinds of evolution. Make sure you understand this when you enter into a discussion with someone. There is the special theory of evolution. This states that limited change can occur within kinds. Think Labradors versus Chihuahuas. Labradors are dogs. Chihuahuas are dogs. Think Shetland ponies and Clydesdales. They're both horses, right? But very different. Change can occur within kinds. No one denies that. No one can deny that. But the question is, can one kind of plant or animal transform into another? You may have Labradoodles and all kind of different mixtures of dogs, same thing with horses and other animals, but that dog will never evolve into a cat. That dog will never evolve into a human. It'll never evolve into a reptile, or it'll never evolve wings and begin to fly. Give him 1,000,000 years. Give him 1,000,000,000 years, folks. It ain't happening. And that is the general theory of evolution. It's atheistic, inorganic evolution. And this is patently false. It is ridiculous. It goes against all knowledge of science that we currently have and ever will have. It doesn't happen. One kind does not change into another. And guess what? All along, the Bible tells us God made everything after its kind. You'll never get a different kind from one kind or another. Here's a quote from a biology textbook. All living organisms have evolved from common ancestors in a gradual historical process of change and diversification. The beginning of time. That's your general theory of evolution. Again, it's ridiculous. It's utterly impossible. But make sure if you talk to somebody about this that you specify, I understand change can occur within kinds. I'm not denying that. And that is, in a sense, evolution. That there's change. So foolish, so ignorant, so deceived as to believe is that one kind can turn into another, and that something can come from nothing. Sorry, folks, it doesn't happen. Never has, never will. There's only one being in the world ever who can create something from nothing. Jehovah is his name. But make sure you understand that when you talk to folks about evolution. One final question here. This is dealing with secret counsel. This is a 2-part question, so if this was your question and you're wondering what happened to the other part, I think I'm going to address it probably in an entire sermon. But there was another part of this, but here's the second part. It wants to know about secret counsel. Turn to Proverbs chapter 3. The question comes from Proverbs 3:32. and wants to know what is God's secret counsel. This sounds really mysterious, you know, when you first read that and you think, God's secret counsel. You know, you want to be in the know on that, right? Proverbs 3, verse 32, here's what the verse says. For the froward is abomination to the Lord, but his secret is with the righteous. Now that's the King James. If you look at it in the New King James, it says his secret counsel is with the upright. Again, it kind of begins to sound mysterious, but here's the thing. You look at this in other versions and you begin to understand what is being said here, and there's a better translation. The American Standard 1901 says his friendship is with the upright. The English Standard Version and also the Revised Standard Version, the RSV, somebody was asking me earlier today, what is the RSV? The RSV is kind of the British equivalent of the ASV. I guess that might be backwards. The ASV is the American equivalent of the RSV because the RSV came first. Then there was an American Standard Version. And the American Standard Version really, and you do some research on this, it's a lot more reliable than the RSV. The RSV, not the worst translation, but the ASV made some definite improvements. But the ESV, the English Standard Version, and the RSV both have exact same phrase in that last part of the verse. The upright are in his, God's, confidence. Now we want to again look at the Hebrew word and define it. It's a Hebrew word. It looks like these Hebrew words. I have to look up pronunciation. Every time I do, I'm just blown away because it looks to me like cowed or something like that. But I'm told it's pronounced sowed, and it means session, company of persons, as in close deliberation. That's what Strong's tells us about it. But it often indicates counsel and or a close or intimate friendship. When you understand that meaning, you begin to understand this a little bit better. In fact, there are some other verses that I'll put these on the screen if you want to write them down as cross references. You see this word used. This is not the only instances, but these are a few to give you an idea of some of the flexibility of this word. Job 29:4, I'm reading King James Version. As I was in the days of my youth when the secret of God was upon my tabernacle. Well, it's the idea of the friendship of God. Job is saying, I miss those long gone by days. You know, Job is suffering. He doesn't understand. He thinks God has become his enemy. He says, I miss the days when God was my friend. But again, there's that idea of secret. And sometimes the King James will translate the exact same word different ways. And sometimes it needs to be translated different ways. I think they missed it on this one at least a few times. I think Proverbs 3, I think Job 29:4, that friendship or friend or counsel is a better translation. Psalm 55:14, we took sweet counsel together. There's your Hebrew word, counsel together, and walked unto the house of God in company. Counsel, friendship. Psalm 64:2, hide me from the secret counsel of the wicked. So it could be friendship for a bad cause or for a good cause. Psalm 83:3, they have taken crafty counsel against thy people and consulted against thy hidden ones. Proverbs 11:3 says, a talebearer revealeth secrets. Secrets, there's your word. So it can mean secret. Again, you got to look at the context. Amos 3:7, he says, surely the Lord will do nothing, but he revealeth his secret unto his servants, the prophets. His secret counsel, his plans. This is the intimate friendship God had with his prophets. He won't do anything without telling them. In fact, in Genesis 18, God says he's getting ready to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. Shall I hide from Abraham the thing which I plan to do? You may recall Abraham's called the friend of God. As we close this question and close our thoughts tonight, I want to go to John 15. Let's go to John chapter 15 and notice something here, because there's an application to this, and it segues right into the Lord's invitation very well. This idea of secret is better translated friendship or counsel in God's confidence. But in John chapter 15, Jesus is speaking to his apostles, but he says something here. John 15, beginning at verse 12. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. Jesus says, ye are my friends if you do whatsoever I command you. Henceforth I call you not servants, for the servant knoweth not what his Lord doeth, but I have called you friends, for all things that I have heard of my Father have I made known unto you. Now he says that to his apostles. They're going to make those things known unto us in the pages of the New Testament. But Jesus tells us he's told us his will. He's told us the will of the Father. He's made clear to us what he expects. And he says if we want to be his friends, if we want to be, as the ESV and the RSV put it, in his confidence, in God's confidence, then we've got to do what Jesus commands us. And so on Q&A night, we close with a question. Are you in his confidence? Are you his friend? Are you doing what he would have you to do? Maybe you're not a Christian. Do you believe Jesus is the Christ? If you do, you can come make the good confession. I believe Jesus Christ is the Son of God. Submit your life to him. Be baptized into Christ, have your sins washed away and added by the Lord to his church. If you are a Christian, are you abiding in his counsel? We can be the friends of God. It's not complicated. It's not mysterious. There's no secret counsel that we've got to uncover. It just means that those who walk in accordance with his word, with his will, are in his confidence. They are his friends. Are you his friend tonight? If not, that's why we extend heaven's invitation. Won't you come as we stand and sing?